Katie stopped laughing the moment she saw who was standing across the street. The music from the house party still pounded behind her, but her expression changed instantly. Like something inside her had suddenly tightened, Cody remained beside his truck without moving, watching her, not waving, not speaking, just staring long enough to make her uncomfortable. Alicia asked Katie if she knew him. Katie hesitated too long before answering. Not really. Minutes later, Katie stepped away from the party crowd and checked her phone again. No messages. But she still looked nervous enough to keep scanning the street. Then Cody opened the passenger door of his truck, and Katie immediately started walking away from the house. Fast. For years afterward, people would replay that night in pieces. A look across the street, an unanswered phone, a girl walking away too quickly. Nobody realized they were watching the last normal moments of Katie Sepich's life.
One voice calling in the distance, one soul trying to get home, but the night kept pulling deeper and she walked alone. Can you hear her in the silence now? In the cold wind blowing through the town, every shadow, every street.
Katie walked faster once she turned the corner away from the party house. The music disappeared behind her almost immediately. Now all she could hear was the sound of her own boots against the pavement. Behind her, Cody slowly pulled the truck away from the curb. Not speeding, not chasing, just following the same direction at a distance that felt impossible to ignore. Katie looked back once. The truck was still there. Her expression changed from discomfort to something closer to fear. Back at the house, Alicia finally realized Katie had left without saying goodbye. That wasn't like her. Katie always told someone before disappearing into the night. Several blocks away, Katie suddenly crossed the street without checking for traffic. Not because she was distracted, because she was trying to lose the truck behind her. Katie reached for her phone while walking, her breathing becoming uneven now. She started typing a message, then stopped halfway through it. Behind the windshield, Cody kept watching her movements carefully. Every time Katie changed direction, the truck adjusted with her. Slowly, patiently, Katie spotted a group of students farther ahead near an apartment building. For a second, relief crossed her face. She immediately started walking toward them, but before she reached them, the students disappeared inside the building. The door shut behind them, and the street became empty again.
What was done, and the people kept speaking her name, long after the headlines faded, long after the fear stopped hiding.
A few seconds later, the truck rolled slowly into view behind her. Cody lowered the passenger window just enough to speak. Katie never stopped walking. Cody said something from inside the truck, but Katie either didn't hear him or didn't want to respond. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself and kept moving. Then Cody smiled. Not warmly, not casually. The kind of smile that made Katie finally stop pretending this interaction was harmless. Katie suddenly turned down a narrower side street between apartment buildings. A shortcut back toward campus, or at least somewhere brighter. For a few seconds, the truck disappeared from view. Katie finally slowed down enough to breathe. Then headlights suddenly washed across the buildings ahead of her. Cody had circled around the block. Now the truck was waiting directly in front of her. Katie stepped backward immediately. Her eyes moved quickly, searching for another way out between the apartment buildings. But the narrow street suddenly felt much smaller than before. Cody opened the driver's door and stepped out calmly. No anger, no sudden aggression. That somehow made the moment feel even worse. Katie tried to keep her voice steady. When she told him to leave her alone, Cody stopped walking for a moment, then tilted his head slightly, studying her reaction. Back at the party house, Alicia called Katie again, straight to voicemail. This time, Alicia stopped pretending everything was probably fine. Katie glanced past Cody toward the street behind him. Empty. Nobody was coming. And for the first time that night, panic fully reached her face. Katie turned suddenly and tried to move past him. For one brief second, it almost worked. Cody grabbed her arm hard enough to stop her momentum. Instantly, Katie screamed at him to let go. The sound echoed between the buildings, then disappeared into the night. Lights turned on briefly in a nearby apartment window. Katie saw them. So did Cody. And suddenly, his calm expression vanished. Katie clawed at him while trying to break free. Her nails dragged across his skin, and for the first time that night, Cody completely lost control. Hours later, the street looked completely normal again. The truck was gone. The silence had returned, and nobody passing through that neighborhood would have guessed a life had just disappeared there. Alicia barely slept before sunrise. By morning, she was replaying every conversation from the party over and over, trying to remember whether Katie had sounded nervous before leaving. She remembered Katie checking her phone repeatedly near the porch, remembered her scanning the street, remembered that strange hesitation when asked about Cody. Now those moments felt completely different. Not random, not harmless. Warning signs nobody recognized in time. Across campus, rumors spread faster than facts. Some students believed Katie left willingly. Others whispered about a man following her after the party. Every version of the story sounded incomplete. Meanwhile, Cody stayed inside his apartment with the blinds closed, watching television, waiting, trying to act like the world outside had nothing to do with him. Dave Sepich drove through Las Cruces for nearly an hour looking for Katie himself. Parking lots, gas stations, quiet streets she might have walked through during the night. Anything felt better than sitting still. Jayan stayed near the phone at home, answering the same question again and again. No, we still haven't heard from her. Every conversation seemed to make the silence feel heavier. At the university, Alicia finally told Ryan about the truck. Not because she was certain it mattered, because she couldn't stop thinking about Katie's face when she saw it. Ryan remembered seeing the same truck earlier that night, parked farther down the street. Engine running, lights off. At the time, he assumed someone was waiting for a friend. Now the memory made his stomach tighten. By afternoon, Katie's photo had spread across campus bulletin boards, dorm halls, and phone screens across the city. The fear was no longer private anymore. Late that evening, Alicia finally listened to Katie's last voicemail again. She had avoided it all day. Now the sound of Katie's voice felt almost unbearable. Katie sounded distracted in the message, still trying to sound normal, still trying to laugh. But there was tension underneath her voice. Alicia somehow missed the first time. Across town, Cody sat awake in silence inside his apartment. The television was muted now. He kept replaying the scratches on his skin every time he looked at his reflection. For the first time since Katie disappeared, Cody looked afraid. Not emotional, not guilty, afraid of being connected to her. At almost the same moment, Dave and Jayan received a call, asking them to come speak with investigators in person. Neither of them asked why. Deep down, they already knew something terrible had changed. Dave drove in complete silence the entire way across town. Jayan kept staring out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur together without really seeing them. Neither of them said Katie's name once. Inside the station, Detective Elena Vasquez avoided speaking immediately. The hesitation alone told Jayan everything she needed to know. Jayan sat down first because her legs suddenly felt weak. Dave remained standing behind her chair, gripping it tightly enough for his knuckles to turn white. When Elena finally spoke, Jayan stopped breathing for a second. Katie had been found outside the city near a landfill road. Later that night, Alicia sat alone on the floor of her apartment, staring at old photos of Katie on her laptop. Every image suddenly felt like evidence of a life that ended too quickly. The next morning, Katie's apartment still looked untouched. Her jacket hung over a chair. Textbooks remained open on the table. A half-finished drink still sat beside the sink. The room looked like someone planned to come back in an hour. Jayan walked through the apartment slowly, touching things without realizing she was doing it. A sweater, a notebook, the edge of Katie's bedroom door. Like part of her still expected Katie to answer from inside. Dave couldn't stay inside for long. The silence in the apartment felt unbearable. Every ordinary object reminded him how suddenly his daughter's life had stopped. Across campus, students had already started changing their routines, walking in groups, checking over their shoulders, calling friends before going home. Katie's disappearance had transformed ordinary nights into something frightening, and somewhere inside his dark apartment, Cody sat completely still, while Katie's face appeared across every local news broadcast in the city. For the first time since that night, he looked trapped by what he had done. Two days after Katie was found, Alicia stopped answering calls from people she didn't know. Everyone wanted details now. What Katie said at the party, who she talked to, whether she seemed afraid. Questions Alicia wished she could answer better. She kept replaying one specific moment in her head. Katie standing near the porch, looking toward the street, then pretending everything was fine when someone noticed. Now Alicia wondered if Katie had already sensed danger long before anyone else did. Not enough to panic, but enough to feel uneasy. Meanwhile, Cody finally stepped outside his apartment for the first time since Katie disappeared. The city already felt different around him. People stared longer now. Police cars moved slower through the neighborhoods. Fear had changed the atmosphere everywhere. When Cody passed a newspaper stand displaying Katie's photograph on the front page, he slowed down without meaning to. And for a brief second, guilt finally reached his face. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the truck parked down the street with its lights off, waiting there quietly, while everyone inside the party kept laughing. The memory felt different now. At the time, the truck blended into the background, like every other parked vehicle near campus. Now it felt impossible that nobody questioned it. Ryan finally got out of bed and called Alicia just after midnight. Neither of them talked much at first. Both were thinking the same thing. They should have done something. Across town, Dave sat alone in Katie's car for nearly 20 minutes without turning the engine on. Her perfume still lingered faintly inside. That hurt more than he expected. At almost the same moment, Cody stood alone in his bathroom, scrubbing at the scratches on his skin, hard enough to leave them red. But no matter how long he stared at them, Katie was still there. The next morning, Jayan found herself dialing Katie's number without thinking. For a few seconds, she listened to the ringing in silence. Then the voicemail answered again. She hung up immediately after hearing Katie's voice. The pain was too sudden, too real. Like losing her all over again each time she called, Dave buried himself in practical tasks instead. Paperwork, phone calls, funeral arrangements, anything that kept him moving long enough to avoid collapsing emotionally. Meanwhile, Cody started noticing police vehicles more often around campus and nearby neighborhoods. Even when they weren't watching him, he felt watched. That afternoon, Cody stopped at a gas station outside the city and caught his reflection briefly in the window beside a missing person flyer with Katie's face on it. For a moment, the two reflections overlapped. Alicia finally returned to the party house 3 nights after Katie disappeared. The music was gone now. So were the crowds. Without people filling the space, the house suddenly felt smaller and strangely uncomfortable. She stood near the porch railing where Katie had been laughing earlier that night. Now every detail felt sharper in hindsight. The way Katie kept checking the street, the tension hidden behind her smile, the truck waiting farther down the road. Alicia suddenly realized Katie may have been trying not to scare anyone, trying to stay calm, trying to avoid creating a scene, trying to convince herself she still had control of the situation. Across town, Cody sat inside his truck outside a convenience store for nearly 15 minutes without going inside. He kept watching people through the windshield, studying whether anyone looked at him too long. Then a young woman walking past the truck glanced toward him briefly. Cody immediately looked away first. The funeral filled faster than anyone expected. Students stood quietly along the walls because there were no seats left inside the church. Some of them had only met Katie once, but they still came. Alicia kept staring at the closed casket without blinking much. Part of her still expected Katie to walk through the doors late and apologize for scaring everyone. Dave spoke only once during the service. His voice nearly broke after saying Katie's name. After that, he couldn't continue. Outside the church, Cody remained parked half a block away inside his truck. Nobody knew he was there. He watched mourners leave through the windshield without stepping outside
long
once.
after the night is gone.
As the church slowly emptied, Jayan noticed the truck parked down the street for only a few seconds before it drove away. At the time, she didn't understand why the sight of it unsettled her so deeply. Later, she would never forget it. The days after the funeral felt strangely disconnected from reality. People returned to classes. Restaurants reopened. Traffic moved normally through the city. But for everyone close to Katie, normal life no longer felt believable. Alicia stopped going to parties completely. Even loud music coming from nearby apartments made her uncomfortable now. Everything reminded her of that night. Ryan became obsessed with reconstructing small details nobody else remembered. Where people were standing, who arrived late, which cars were parked near the street, as if enough thinking could somehow change the outcome. Meanwhile, Cody tried forcing himself back into ordinary routines. Gas stations, stores, coffee shops. But every public space now felt dangerous to him. Every time someone looked at him too long, Cody immediately assumed they knew. Late one evening, Jayan opened Katie's closet for the first time since the funeral. The smell of her perfume still lingered faintly inside. That small detail shattered her faster than anything else had. She sat on the floor holding one of Katie's sweaters against her chest for nearly 20 minutes without moving. Not crying anymore, just exhausted by grief. Across town, Cody stopped sleeping properly. Every unexpected sound jolted him awake. Car doors, sirens, footsteps outside his apartment. His mind never stopped replaying that night. For the first time, he started imagining what witnesses might remember. A face, a truck, a voice. Tiny details suddenly felt dangerous. At almost the same moment, Alicia finally admitted something to herself she had been avoiding for days. Katie hadn't walked away from the party casually. She had been trying to get away from someone. Alicia called Ryan again just after midnight. This time, her voice sounded different, less uncertain, more afraid. She told Ryan she was certain now. Katie had been trying to leave without drawing attention to herself, trying not to escalate the situation, trying not to panic anyone around her. Ryan finally admitted something he hadn't told anyone yet. He remembered seeing Cody watching Katie long before she left the party. Not casually, fixated. The realization hit both Alicia and Ryan at the same time. Katie may have understood the danger before anyone else did. She just never got the chance to escape it. Across town, Cody sat alone inside his truck in an empty parking lot, gripping the steering wheel hard enough for his hands to shake. For the first time since that night, control was slipping away from him. The next morning, Dave found Jayan sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by printed articles about Katie's case. She hadn't slept. Coffee sat untouched beside her. Jayan kept circling the same thought repeatedly. Someone knew exactly what happened to Katie. And somewhere in the city, that person was still waking up every morning pretending to be normal. At a nearby gas station, Cody noticed two college students staring at Katie's missing person flyer taped beside the entrance. He immediately turned around and left, without buying anything. Everywhere Cody looked now, Katie's face seemed to follow him. On bulletin boards, on television screens, inside newspaper stands. The city itself was beginning to close around him. Meanwhile, Alicia made a decision she should have made earlier. She was finally ready to tell investigators everything she remembered about Cody. Alicia sat across from Detective Elena Vasquez for nearly a full minute before speaking. The silence wasn't hesitation anymore. It was guilt. When Alicia finally described the way Cody had been watching Katie that night, Elena stopped writing for a second. The behavior sounded wrong immediately. Too focused. Too deliberate. Alicia admitted she almost walked Katie to her car that night. Almost. That single word stayed lodged in her chest like something sharp. Across town, Cody parked outside a liquor store and stayed inside the truck long after sunset. He kept checking the mirrors repeatedly now, watching headlights, watching strangers, watching for police. For the first time since Katie disappeared, Detective Elena Vasquez quietly said Cody's name out loud after Alicia left the room. And once she did, the atmosphere around the case changed completely.
Cold wind moving through the desert.
Cody noticed the unmarked car outside his apartment before sunrise. It stayed there just long enough to make him stop walking toward his truck. He tried convincing himself it was unrelated. Just another car, another morning, another coincidence. But his breathing kept getting shallower anyway. Inside the unmarked car, Elena watched Cody carefully without speaking. The way he scanned the street, the way he avoided eye contact, the way panic kept surfacing for half a second before disappearing again. Mark Bennett quietly admitted Cody didn't behave like someone uninvolved. Not after seeing Katie's face covering the entire city. Not after weeks of pressure. Then Cody suddenly looked directly toward the unmarked car. And for one brief second, Elena felt certain he already knew they were watching him. Cody drove aimlessly for almost an hour after leaving the apartment. No destination. No routine. Just movement. Like sitting still had become impossible for him. At a red light, Cody suddenly noticed Katie's missing person flyer taped to a bus stop bench beside him. He looked away immediately, but not before recognizing the exact photo. Across town, Dave and Jayan met privately with Elena for the first time since the funeral. Neither parent cared about legal details yet. They only wanted one thing, the truth. Jayan asked Elena whether she believed the person responsible was still walking freely through the city. Elena hesitated before answering. That hesitation terrified Dave more than any direct answer could have. Meanwhile, Cody parked near the desert outskirts outside Las Cruces and sat motionless behind the wheel, staring at the empty landscape where he had tried to bury the memory of that night. But the silence out there only made Katie feel closer. Cody stayed near the desert for nearly an hour without stepping out of the truck. The longer he sat there, the less distant that night felt. Every sound, every movement, every second kept replaying itself inside his head. He remembered Katie fighting back harder than he expected. The scratches, the screaming, the panic that exploded once control slipped away from him. What haunted Cody most wasn't the violence. It was the moment Katie realized nobody was coming to help her. He could still see that expression clearly. Back in the city, Alicia finally walked past the street where Katie disappeared for the first time since that night. She almost kept going, but something made her stop. When Alicia looked down, she noticed faint scratch marks, still visible on the side of a metal railing near the sidewalk. Tiny, almost invisible, but enough to make her stomach drop instantly. Alicia couldn't stop staring at the scratches on the railing. The marks were small, but suddenly the entire street felt painfully real again. Not a story, not a headline. A place where Katie had been terrified and alone. For the first time, Alicia started imagining Katie's final moments clearly instead of abstractly. The fear, the confusion, the desperate attempt to escape without making things worse. Across town, Cody finally returned to his apartment after sunset. But the moment he stepped inside, the silence immediately closed around him again. He turned the television on, only to drown out his own thoughts. But Katie's story was already everywhere now. Her face appeared again within minutes. Then the news anchor mentioned a possible witness coming forward. And Cody's expression changed immediately. For the first time since the murder, genuine panic took over. Cody muted the television immediately. The apartment fell silent again, except for the sound of his breathing. For several seconds, he just stared at the screen without moving. Meanwhile, Alicia sat alone in her car, outside the apartment street where Katie disappeared. She couldn't bring herself to leave yet. Something about the silence there felt unfinished. Inside Katie's old apartment, Jayan quietly folded clothes she knew nobody would wear again. Dave watched from the doorway without speaking. Neither of them had the strength left for words anymore. Across the city, students were still sharing Katie's photograph online, hanging flyers, and warning each other not to walk alone after dark. Without realizing it, an entire community had begun carrying part of her story. And somewhere inside the growing fear surrounding Katie's death, the truth was beginning to close in around Cody Posey. Even before the investigation fully caught up to him, emotionally, he was already collapsing. The pressure around Cody changed completely after the witness information reached investigators. For the first time, he no longer felt hidden inside the background of Katie's story. He felt exposed. He started noticing every sound outside the apartment now. Footsteps in the hallway, car doors outside, voices near the parking lot. Everything felt connected to him somehow. Across town, Alicia finally slept for the first time in days. But even in sleep, Katie's last night kept replaying differently in her mind. Not as scattered memories anymore, as warning signs. Dave and Jayan had stopped asking whether the person responsible would eventually be found. Now they asked something much harder: how someone could destroy a life, then continue living normally afterward. Meanwhile, Cody kept staring at the scratches Katie left on his skin. They were fading physically now, but emotionally, they were becoming impossible for him to escape. Cody started avoiding familiar places around campus completely. The coffee shop near the university, the gas station he usually stopped at, even certain streets near the party house. Too many memories lived there now. Everywhere he looked, Katie's face still remained visible. On bulletin boards, store windows, student backpacks covered in memorial ribbons. The city refused to let her disappear quietly. At the same time, Alicia and Ryan began comparing their memories together more carefully. Not like witnesses, like people trying to understand how someone they loved disappeared right in front of them. Ryan finally admitted he remembered Katie looking directly afraid near the end of the night. Not uncomfortable, afraid. That distinction changed everything emotionally. And somewhere inside the growing reconstruction of that night, Alicia realized something devastating. Katie had probably understood she was in danger long before anyone else noticed. Cody stopped answering calls from almost everyone. Friends, family, people checking in after seeing the news. Every conversation felt dangerous now. The isolation only made his thoughts louder. Katie screaming, Katie fighting back, Katie staring at him in panic beneath the streetlights. Those memories had started replaying constantly now. Meanwhile, Dave started carrying one of Katie's old photographs in his wallet everywhere he went. Not because he needed to remember her face, because he was terrified the world eventually wouldn't. Jayan had changed too. The grief was still there, but underneath it now lived something colder and more focused. She no longer wanted comfort. She wanted answers. Across town, Cody finally looked at himself in the mirror, long enough to admit something he had been avoiding for weeks. He was no longer afraid of getting caught someday. He was afraid it was about to happen soon. Detective Elena Vasquez stopped viewing Cody as just another possible lead. By now, his behavior had started forming a pattern that emotionally matched the timeline surrounding Katie's disappearance. It wasn't only the witness statements anymore. It was the fear Cody carried everywhere he went now. The kind of fear people wear when they know the truth is moving closer. Mark Bennett clearly warned Eleanor that psychological pressure could make Cody unpredictable. Cornered people made reckless decisions, especially people already collapsing emotionally. Meanwhile, Alicia returned to campus for the first time since Katie's funeral. Everything looked normal again on the surface. That almost made it worse. As Alicia passed the same street where Katie disappeared, she noticed fresh flowers someone had quietly left near the sidewalk. And suddenly the reality of Katie being gone forever hit her harder than ever before. That night, Cody drove farther outside the city than usual, past the neighborhoods, past the gas stations, past the last stretch of highway lights. Like distance itself could somehow quiet what was happening inside his head. He eventually pulled over near the same empty desert area investigators had searched weeks earlier. For several minutes, he just sat there staring into the darkness outside the truck. The silence brought everything back stronger. Katie running, Katie screaming, Katie realizing too late she was completely alone. Those memories no longer felt distant anymore. They felt alive. Back in Las Cruces, Dave and Jayan sat together reviewing updates from investigators long after midnight. The grief was still crushing, but hope had started returning quietly beneath it. For the first time, they believed the truth might actually reach the surface. Alone in the desert darkness, Cody finally broke down for the first time since Katie's death. Not because he missed her, because deep down, he knew the life he had before that night was already over.
And though the years keep passing slowly, her voice still moves through all of us. Through the family, still searching through the tears nobody sees. Through the laws that now protect us, through the scars we never.
By the next week, investigators had quietly shifted their attention almost entirely toward Cody. Not publicly, not officially, but emotionally, the case had started tightening around him. Alicia's description of the way Cody watched Katie that night stayed in Elena's mind constantly now. Not casual interest, control, the kind that grows dangerous once ignored. Meanwhile, Cody noticed the same unmarked vehicle near his apartment again. This time, it stayed longer, long enough for panic to fully settle into his chest. Inside the car, Elena noticed something important immediately. Cody wasn't behaving like someone curious about police presence. He was behaving like someone already expecting it. And for the first time since Katie's death, Elena quietly admitted something to Mark she had avoided saying aloud. "I think he's breaking." Cody barely stayed inside his apartment anymore. The walls felt too quiet, too close, too full of memories he couldn't shut off. He started driving constantly again, sometimes for hours. No music, no destination, just movement and empty roads. Meanwhile, Jayan had started speaking publicly about Katie more often, not because the grief had become easier, because silence now felt unbearable. As more people heard Katie's story, something shifted across the city. Fear slowly turned into anger, and anger began turning into pressure. Far from the memorial lights, Cody sat alone inside his truck, watching the gathering from a distance hidden behind darkness. And once again, nobody there realized the killer was already among them. The memorial stayed with Cody long after he drove away. The candles, Katie's photographs, the sound of people speaking about her like she was still present. It made the guilt feel impossible to outrun. Meanwhile, Elena received confirmation that witnesses had independently described the same truck near the party that night. Dark pickup, engine running, lights off. The details aligned too closely to ignore anymore. Mark quietly pointed out something else. Every time investigators increased pressure around the case, Cody's behavior became more unstable afterward. Like he could feel the investigation moving closer without anyone speaking to him directly. Across town, Dave sat with Jayan, reviewing Katie's childhood photographs after the memorial ended. For the first time in weeks, they talked less about how she died, and more about who she had been. And somewhere inside the loneliness of his apartment, Cody finally understood something terrifying. Even if police never reached him, he would never mentally escape Katie again. The emotional pressure surrounding Cody finally started affecting his routines completely. He stopped shaving regularly, stopped sleeping properly, stopped caring whether people noticed him acting strange. Elena noticed the shift immediately during surveillance. Cody no longer looked like someone trying to blend into ordinary life. He looked cornered. At the same time, Jayan had started pushing publicly for stronger DNA collection laws connected to violent crimes. The case was becoming larger than the investigation itself now. Katie's death was beginning to expose flaws nobody wanted to discuss before. For Dave, the fight had stopped being only about punishment. It had become about preventing another family from living through the same nightmare. Meanwhile, alone inside his apartment, Cody watched another news segment discussing Katie's case and the growing public pressure around it. This time, he looked less afraid of police, and more afraid of the world finally seeing who he really was. Weeks after Katie's death, the investigation finally reached a painful turning point. Investigators believed Cody was responsible, but believing it and proving it legally were two very different things. Critical DNA evidence existed, but under New Mexico law at the time, investigators could not immediately force Cody to provide a sample. The delay felt unbearable. For Dave and Jayan, the situation felt impossible to accept. The person investigators believed killed their daughter was still waking up freely every morning, still driving through the same city, still breathing ordinary air. Meanwhile, Cody sensed the pressure building, even without understanding the legal details. People watched him differently now. Even strangers seemed dangerous. And as the legal battle quietly began forming around Katie's case, Dave and Jayan made a decision that would eventually change New Mexico forever. They refused to let the system move on from their daughter. The legal delays surrounding Cody started emotionally exhausting everyone connected to the case. Investigators felt trapped. Katie's family felt abandoned. And Cody kept moving through the city like a man waiting for a collapse he could already feel coming. Inside the investigation office, Elena kept returning to the same thought repeatedly. If Cody truly believed he was getting away with Katie's murder, why was he unraveling so badly? Meanwhile, Dave and Jayan had stopped speaking about Katie's case privately. Almost every conversation now happened publicly. Community meetings, interviews, legal discussions. Grief had transformed into purpose. As support for Katie's law quietly began growing, Cody watched news coverage alone from his apartment in complete silence. Every public discussion about Katie felt directed at him personally now. And somewhere beneath all the legal frustration, emotional pressure, and public attention, the truth about Katie's final night was finally beginning to corner Cody emotionally from every direction. The pressure surrounding Katie's case eventually reached beyond Las Cruces. More media outlets started covering the investigation, and with every broadcast, Cody felt his world shrinking further. Meanwhile, Elena and Mark kept rebuilding Katie's final timeline repeatedly. Every witness statement, every movement near the party, every moment Cody appeared near her. The story no longer felt incomplete anymore. Alicia eventually agreed to publicly describe Katie's behavior that night. Not because she wanted attention, because she needed people to understand Katie had been trying to stay calm while feeling unsafe. For Jayan, hearing Alicia describe Katie's fear changed something permanently inside her. The grief became sharper, more personal, more horrifying. And while Katie's family fought publicly for answers, Cody was quietly reaching the point where he could barely control his own mind anymore. Cody stopped trying to maintain normal appearances completely. Dirty dishes filled the apartment. Curtains stayed closed all day. The television remained on constantly, just to block out silence. Meanwhile, Katie's story had started reaching lawmakers across New Mexico, not only as a murder investigation anymore, as proof that the legal system had failed to move fast enough. Dave struggled with the attention more than Jayan did. Every interview forced him to relive losing Katie again, but he kept showing up anyway. Across town, Elena quietly admitted to Mark that Katie's family had changed the emotional direction of the entire investigation. This was no longer only about solving a murder. It had become about fixing what allowed justice to stall afterward, and alone inside the apartment, growing darker around him every day, Cody finally began understanding something terrifying. Even if the law moved slowly, Katie's story was never going to let him disappear quietly. As pressure around Katie's case continued growing publicly, Cody became increasingly reckless emotionally. He started drinking more, driving faster, sleeping less. Like part of him had already stopped caring what happened next. Elena noticed the escalation immediately during surveillance updates. Cody no longer behaved like someone carefully hiding a secret. He behaved like someone emotionally drowning beneath it. Meanwhile, Katie's law gained wider public support. Parents, students, victims' advocates. More people began realizing how many violent offenders slipped through legal gaps before DNA could be collected. For Jayan, speaking publicly about Katie's death never became easier. But every interview felt like another refusal to let her daughter be forgotten. And somewhere inside his collapsing isolation, Cody finally realized something no amount of fear could change anymore. Katie's voice had become louder after her death than he ever imagined possible. Eventually, the investigation reached the moment everyone had been emotionally moving toward for months. Investigators finally secured the DNA evidence they had been fighting to obtain. When the results confirmed the connection to Cody, nobody inside the room celebrated. The victory felt too heavy for that. Too late to undo what happened to Katie, Dave and Jayan received the news quietly at home. Jayan cried immediately. Dave just lowered his head and stared at the floor for several seconds without speaking. Across town, Cody sensed something had changed before anyone even contacted him. The fear inside him suddenly became sharper, more final, and after months of emotional pressure, grief, fear, and silence, the truth about Katie Sepich could finally no longer hide behind uncertainty.
Young voices walking safer now because somebody refused to stop fighting, because love became louder than lost, because memory survived the dark. Can you hear her in the silence?
Cody barely reacted when investigators finally moved in. By then, fear had already exhausted him emotionally. It looked less like surprise, and more like a man realizing the collapse he feared had finally arrived. Elena watched Cody carefully during the arrest. No anger, no panic, no attempt to run, only exhaustion. For one brief second, Cody looked toward the street instead of the detectives, toward ordinary people driving past without realizing Katie's case was finally reaching its turning point. Across town, Dave and Jayan received confirmation that Cody was officially in custody. Jayan immediately covered her face and cried. Dave sat completely still beside her, and while the arrest finally brought movement to Katie's case, nothing about it felt victorious, because the one person everyone wanted to bring home had already been gone for far too long. News of Cody's arrest spread across campus within hours. Students stopped in hallways staring at their phones in silence. For many of them, the fear that had haunted the city for months suddenly became real all over again. Alicia sat alone after seeing the arrest report and cried harder than she expected to. Not from relief. From finally accepting that Katie's fear that night had been real from the very beginning. Meanwhile, Cody finally sat inside an interrogation room facing the reality he had spent months trying to outrun. The silence around him felt completely different now. More final. Elena studied Cody through the observation window carefully. After months of pressure, fear, surveillance, and grief surrounding Katie's case, this was the first time Cody truly looked trapped. And somewhere beneath the emotional exhaustion filling the investigation, Katie's voice finally felt louder than the fear that had protected Cody for so long. Hours into custody, Cody still barely spoke. He answered simple questions quietly. But every time Katie's name entered the conversation, his entire body tensed immediately. Elena noticed the pattern quickly. Cody could emotionally distance himself from investigators, but he could not emotionally distance himself from Katie anymore. Meanwhile, Dave and Jayan finally visited Katie's grave alone after the arrest became public. For several minutes, neither of them spoke at all. The silence carried everything words couldn't anymore. Jayan eventually whispered something Dave would remember forever. We finally know who took her from us. But even saying it aloud didn't bring peace yet. Back inside the interrogation room, Cody finally lowered his head into his hands for the first time. And in that moment, he looked less like someone hiding from investigators, and more like someone unable to escape himself. As the case moved toward prosecution, the emotional weight surrounding Katie's story only grew heavier. Because now, the city knew something horrifying for certain. Katie had sensed the danger before she disappeared. Alicia struggled the most with that realization. She replayed their final conversation constantly now, searching for some tiny moment where she could have changed the outcome. Meanwhile, Cody remained emotionally hollow inside custody. The panic that once consumed him had faded. Now there was only exhaustion and silence. Elena quietly admitted to Mark that arresting Cody had not emotionally ended the case the way she expected, because Katie's family still had to survive everything that came afterward. And for Dave and Jayan, justice no longer meant simply identifying the man who killed Katie. It meant making sure the failures surrounding her case never happened to another family again. Months after Katie's murder, the emotional shape of the city had permanently changed. Students walked home differently now. Parents worried differently. Fear had rewritten ordinary life around New Mexico State University. Katie's law continued gaining support far beyond the original investigation. What began as one family's grief had evolved into a movement demanding change. For Alicia and Ryan, healing never arrived cleanly. Katie's final night stayed with both of them permanently, not only as trauma, but as a reminder of how quickly ordinary moments can become irreversible. Inside prison walls, Cody's world had become painfully small. But for Katie's family, the emotional consequences of what happened would never truly stay confined to one room or one sentence. Katie Sepich's story did not end with the arrest. It continued through every family that demanded justice faster, every victim protected by stronger DNA laws, and every person who refused to let her disappear quietly from memory.
Candles glowing through the evening air, flowers resting where the pain still lives. Parents turning grief into something stronger, refusing to let the silence win.
Years after Katie's murder, her story still lingered across New Mexico in quiet ways. Inside courtrooms, across campuses, inside conversations between parents and students walking home after dark. The fear never disappeared completely, but neither did Katie's voice. Katie's law eventually became more than legislation. For many families, it became proof that grief could still force change inside a system that once felt impossible to move. Elena eventually admitted something she rarely said aloud. Katie's case changed investigators too, not because it was difficult, because it reminded everyone how fragile ordinary life really is. For Alicia and Ryan, Katie never became only part of the past. Certain songs, certain streets, certain nights near campus. Some memories stayed emotionally frozen forever. And although Cody Posey eventually disappeared behind prison walls, Katie Sepich's story continued living far beyond the crime itself. Not because of how she died, but because the people who loved her refused to let silence become the final chapter. Long after the investigation ended, Katie's case still remained emotionally alive for the people closest to her. Not as headlines anymore, as memories that quietly resurfaced without warning. Jayan still kept some of Katie's belongings, exactly where they had always been. A sweater folded carefully, photographs untouched, small pieces of ordinary life frozen in time. Dave rarely spoke publicly anymore, but every time another family mentioned Katie's law helping protect victims faster, he quietly felt Katie's impact still moving through the world. Meanwhile, Cody Posey's world remained permanently confined behind prison walls. But even there, the silence never fully erased Katie's final night from his mind. And in the end, Katie Sepich's story became something larger than tragedy alone. It became proof that even after unimaginable loss, a single voice can still force an entire system to change. Years later, students at New Mexico State University still spoke about Katie quietly during late-night walks across campus. Not like a distant crime story, like someone whose absence permanently changed the atmosphere around them. Alicia eventually stopped replaying Katie's final night every single day, but certain moments still brought everything back instantly. A crowded party, a dark street, someone walking alone after midnight. Ryan kept one photograph of Katie inside his apartment long after everyone else stopped discussing the case publicly. Not out of guilt anymore, out of refusal to forget who she really was before the tragedy consumed the story. For Elena and Mark, Katie's case remained one of the investigations that never emotionally disappeared completely. Not because of the violence, because of how many lives continued changing long after the arrest, and even after the headlines faded. Katie Sepich's story continued surviving through memory, law, grief, and the people who refused to let her become just another forgotten name. Time moved forward for everyone connected to Katie's case. But grief never moved in a straight line. Some days felt lighter, some nights still felt unbearable. Dave eventually learned how to speak about Katie without completely collapsing emotionally afterward. But certain memories still hit him without warning. Her laugh, her voice calling from another room. Ordinary moments that no longer existed. Meanwhile, Katie's law continued protecting people Dave and Jayan would never even meet. And strangely, that became one of the few things that helped the grief feel survivable. Far away from the public attention, Cody Posey remained alone with the consequences of what he had done. The headlines faded over time, but isolation did not. And although Katie Sepich's life ended far too early, the impact she left behind continued reaching people she never had the chance to meet. Through law, through memory, through the people who loved her enough to keep fighting after unimaginable loss. Katie Sepich's story never truly became about only one night in Las Cruces. It became about everything that happened afterward. The grief, the fight, the refusal to let silence win. Dave and Jayan spent years making sure Katie's name remained connected to change instead of only tragedy. And eventually, people across New Mexico began recognizing her story not just with sadness, but with respect. For Alicia and Ryan, Katie's memory stayed tied to ordinary moments more than headlines. Late-night conversations, music playing through apartment windows, campus streets glowing after midnight. The pieces of life that once felt permanent. Meanwhile, Cody Posey remained permanently separated from the world he destroyed. But even prison walls could not erase what happened that night. And in the end, Katie Sepich's voice outlived the fear, the violence, and the silence that tried to bury it. Because the people who loved her refused to stop speaking her name.
Because memories survive the dark. Can you hear her in the silence now? In the cold wind blowing through the town. Every shadow, every street light, every heartbeat still remembers her. And though the years keep passing slowly, her voice still moves through all of us. Through the family still searching, through the tears nobody sees, through the laws that now protect us, through the scars we never speak, and the night may hide the answers.